Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast, where we introduce you to a world of small to medium business acquisitions and mergers. We interview business owners, industry leaders, authors, mentors, and other influencers with the sole intent to share with you what it looks like to buy or sell a business. Let's get rolling. And now a moment for our sponsors. I want to highly recommend you get Acquisition Aficionado magazine. Every month, Acquisition Aficionado magazine brings you tactics for business buying and selling you won't find anywhere else. Learn firsthand from industry leaders who share their success stories, featuring in-depth interviews and stories from leading figures in the business acquisition industry. This multi-platform mobile magazine speaks to acquisition entrepreneurs wherever they are in the journey. And I want you to visit acquisitionaficionado.com today. Hello and welcome to the How to Exit podcast. I'm here today with Lane Carrick, and he is a seasoned senior M&A guy who's been around and done all kinds of stuff, multiple sectors of the industry, multiple industries, different levels. So this is going to be a fun conversation to have somebody who's been in this space for a while and just truly knows everything from big business down to the small mom and pop, mergers and acquisitions, to teach it in college, all the stuff you had. It's going to be a pleasure learning from you today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Ron. I'm honored to be here and appreciate being able to come back for my second interview.
Yeah, I should have looked it up beforehand. You were in one of our first ones, I think, probably in the first, I would say definitely in the first 50, but maybe even the first 10 shows I did. So it's been a couple years since we've chatted. We both, I think you stayed put. You're in Dallas. I've been to at least 2 locations, if not 3 since then. I'm one of those guys you call a digital nomad. I have skills, will travel. Prior military, so it never bothered me to move when they moved me around, and it kind of stuck with me. So we move around a little bit wherever the opportunity presents itself, or most of the time wherever family needs us. So let's start off with your origin story. Kind of, how did you get into the space? What are the cool things you've done? I know you're everything from a college professor to an advisor to a investment bank. Tell us the story of how this came about.
Yeah. I'm originally from Memphis, Tennessee, born and raised there. My father went to high school with a guy named Kemmons Wilson, who founded Holiday Inns. My dad became an early franchisee of Holiday Inns and built a chain of motels across the Southeast as a fellow entrepreneur. And for your audience, so they can appreciate the fact that he pledged my mother's wedding ring and his $10,000 life insurance policy as collateral to the bank to borrow much more value than that to start building these Holiday Inns. And he told me to go to college and study what pleased me, because it didn't matter. Once I graduated, I would learn everything I needed to learn by being in the family business. And so I studied philosophy and psychology. And my senior year, I think after Thanksgiving, before Christmas, he called me in my dorm and told me he had good news. He'd sold the business and retired. So my journey was hijacked. I came out of college and did what all philosophy majors do. I waited tables for a year. I fell backwards into financial services. Went to work for a Wall Street firm as a broker. Learned the investment world. Left the wirehouse to become a fee-only financial advisor back in the 90s, early on in the game when there weren't a lot of fee-only financial advisors. That firm, Sovereign Wealth Management, grew into a national firm. We became a multifamily family office. And talk about a learning experience. I was working for ultra high net worth families across the country, being their trusted problem solver. So it wasn't, do I like this stock or that bond? It really was trying to understand the issues related to the management of their overall assets. In many cases, it involved operating businesses. So I was an advisor to them when they bought businesses, when they sold businesses, and I in turn grew my business, started doing acquisitions for Sovereign, and then sold to a roll-up group who sold to Goldman Sachs. So I sort of got every piece of that, the bigger fish by, eating the smaller fish and getting eaten by the larger fish upstream. And along that journey, I founded a number of businesses, or was a founder of a number of businesses, including banks, including the B.B. King's Blues Club with Riley B. King, the legendary B.B. King, and had some great successes and some extraordinary failures as an investor in private equity. And startup businesses. But you take something from every one of those experiences and incorporate it. My wife and I moved to Dallas. I sold my businesses, the bank that I was chairman of and the wealth management firm, about 10, 12 years ago, and moved to Dallas in 2019. I teach, as you know, at Southern Methodist University as an instructor through the Business Leadership Center of the Cox School of Business. I conduct seminars on mergers and acquisitions and alternative investments for MBA students there. SMU is a top 20 MBA program, and I call them kids, but I have to correct myself because a lot of them are, they graduated from a high quality school. They've gone out and worked for Goldman or McKinsey or somebody, and they're coming back to get an MBA. It's not unusual for me to have searchers, independent sponsors in my class that are working during the day and going to attending my class at night and then looking to buy deals on the side. So that world has really evolved. And I think it's a bit corny, but I think I learn as much from the students as maybe they learn from me. And I really enjoy that. I like being in the academic environment, even though I'm at the very low end of the food chain there. I like being in the environment. I like being on a college campus, and I like engaging with very smart, motivated people. I got a consulting gig with a small business brokerage group here in town. The partners had split up, and so I came in to sort of clean up that mess, and I worked some deals, and I thought that was really interesting. While I was there, that firm was acquired by a large national M&A shop, and I sat in that seat with them for about a year as well. So maybe 3 years of experience with a business broker and then with a large national M&A. Although I will tell you, the difference between a business broker and an M&A advisor is still a mystery to me. They're all doing the same things. It's just semantics. February 1st of this year, I decided that at 65 years of age, I was stupid enough to try to do this on my own. So I launched Optima Mergers and Acquisitions. I'm positioned in the lower middle market. So my experience with the business brokerage firm and the large M&A advisor was that a small percentage of deals get done, particularly in small businesses where you have a buyer that may be sophisticated in the operation of their particular business. It's manufacturing widgets. They're great at manufacturing widgets, but they don't know what they don't know about the process of selling their business. They may or may not be represented by a quality sales advisor because this is an open industry, right? There are no real credentials or licensing. And so pretty much anybody can be a business broker. That was similar to when I became a financial advisor. Anybody could be a financial advisor. You just adopted the title and held yourself out. And the buyer oftentimes is not a sophisticated buyer. They're coming out of the corporate world and they're looking to control their destiny through the ownership of the business. And then you got the SBA typically in the middle of those deals. And so it's a very challenging environment to operate in, depending on whose data you follow. 15 to 30% of deals actually get done. But above that, you get up to maybe $10 million of EBITDA, 50 to 100 million of revenue. A lot of those businesses, which we'll call lower middle market, are still too small for Houlihan Lokey and Stevens and the regional investment banks to take on as clients. So I felt like there was a gap. There's certainly plenty of competition there, but I felt like that was a nice space for me, where I fit, where I understood, where I'd done transactions there, where there was a greater likelihood of deals being successful because you had just by sheer size, you typically had a more sophisticated owner operator with better books and records. And you had my buyers have been private equity firms and family offices and generally speaking, well, you never have the SBA involved at the size I'm working on. And mostly they're funded, private equity family office firms. So less risk of the deal falling apart on financial issues. So here I am. I'm running Optima Mergers and Acquisitions in Dallas and focused on lower middle market transactions and having fun.
Yeah, a lot of people don't they automatically see that the SBA loan will go up to 5 million, and they don't know that there's a few programs out there where they can get it to 7, maybe as high as 8 or 9 with these, it's a Paris Pursuit. I forgot what the name of there's a mezzanine loan or a bridge loan that'll go above
Yep.
that. They're taking second though, so it's kind of a tough loan to get, higher interest rate because it's kind of a second
Right.
position to the primary. But that still only goes that 7 to 9 range. And then you got this gap because where that, acquisition valuation range, where the private equity doesn't wanna dip down to those $9 million businesses, 10, 12. They're usually, maybe 10 million in EBITDA, but not 10 million in, or 4 million in EBITDA, but not 4 million in acquisition price. So there's
Right.
an unserved market, in that space. I honestly think that the SBA loan ought to do something where if you're new in this space, a lot of people think SBA is loaning you money. They're not. The bank's loaning you money guaranteed by the SBA, but they cover 75% of the like guarantee a certain percentage of that. I think that they should go say that's $5 million. And say if they go to 8, they go 70%. If they go to 10, they go to 65%. I think more banks would take the opportunity to lend on these things as long as the majority of their expense, their capital deployed was covered. I really hope to see that they open that up some.
Great idea. I hadn't thought about that, but I agree with you. Banks would probably be more careful in underwriting those larger deals. Having been chairman of a bank, it's all about managing that risk. But I do think that there are deals that would be presented that they would be willing to take more risk, advance more money against. That's a great idea.
So, why do you I know my own things, and I'll share them in a second, but why do you think such a small percentage of these smaller deals, let's say sub $10 million deals, actually end up closing?
I will confess that I'm still trying to get my head around that. I've spent 3 years sitting in this seat, and I'm not sure I have a definitive answer. I will tell you that I actually think that the smaller deals, the sub $10 million deals, sub SBA, lending limit deals, should be more likely to get completed because the way the SBA loans they really define the price. There's not this blue sky because you have to, the business has to cash flow enough and project to cash flow enough to have a certain debt, coverage ratio. And so you really get down to a tight range of multiples of sellers' discretionary earnings or net profits. And so you would think that that would help because one of my operating premises is that businesses don't sell because sellers have unrealistic expectations about the value of their business. They get to a business broker M&A advisor who doesn't tell them your house is not $1 million house; it's a $500,000 house. Let's take you to market. We'll see where the offers come in. If it's a beauty pageant, maybe they'll bid it up, but you're wasting your time and mine to go out to the market at a price that is, that's not going to work. So I don't think the industry does a good job, people in my seat, of informing sellers. This is where the market's going to value you. This is where you're going to transact. Your buyer is going to go to the SBA or a bank that's going to do SBA financing to buy your business. And this is how they're going to value you. And oh, by the way, there's going to be an independent valuation by the bank to determine, so even if you agree to a higher price, if the valuation doesn't support it, the deal's not going to get done there. But I think unrealistic expectations are part of it. I think that a lot of businesses aren't prepared to go to market and they don't know what they don't know. They don't understand the consequence of not having good books and records. They don't understand the consequence of having, incomes that don't hit the income statement, and thinking there's value in that. That they see the buyers as very adversarial, and you get into this adversarial relationship, and then they get into a process where there's going to be a due diligence, and they're not really prepared for that emotionally. And so I think it's a lot of variables, but I think if I had to pull one out and say this may be the most important, it is misplaced expectations, uninformed expectations of the value of the business that are not addressed directly by the sell side advisor.
The other saying I always put out there is everything you have now, everything you ever want to have in the future, and everything you've ever had in the past, all comes down to communication. Conversations you've had, should have had, or should be having. It all boils down to that. It's all done in conversation. right? Where these are businesses of human beings working with other human beings. And what's happening, what I took from your story, and I 100% agree, is what's happening is the business broker advisors, they're failing to have tough conversations because they're of fear of having the tough conversation. So
Yeah.
scenario is business owner decides he wants to retire, and he calls up his CPA and says, "Hey, I think I want to retire." He goes, "Yeah, you probably ought to talk to a financial advisor about the tax implications and your retirement." So he calls his wealth advisor up and goes, "Hey, I want to retire." And the wealth advisor goes, "Well, you're not ready yet. You don't have enough money in your retirement plans for what we talked about. You need another $2.5 million. Get $2.5 million for your business." So he starts calling brokers and go, "Hey, I need $2.5 million for my business because my advisor says I need that." And the broker never looks at him in the eyes and says, "That's apples and oranges. That has nothing to do with your business." Right? They go,
Yeah.
"Let's see how we can get you there." "Oh, I bet I can get you there." Or they come back, they maybe they're a little brave and they go, "I can only get you 2." Right? But they call the next broker up and then he said, "The last broker said I can get 2 out of my business. What can you do?" And they get to the
Yeah.
number they wanna get to when the business is probably worth 1, right? Or 1.5. And, they spend 6 months listing, go through all this stuff, and they finally get it in front of a SBA lender or any type of investor that's gonna do due diligence, and the value's not there. Like, I think Bruce Marks is famous for the quote is, "Congratulations, you've negotiated a deal we can't close."
That's,
He's an SBA lender pro, right? He's like, "Congratulations,
yeah.
you've negotiated something we can't put together, right? The SBA is not gonna lend on this."
And that should, again, I just keep going back to that really should keep everybody honest. It should be something where you can look the client in the eyes and say, look, I'm the messenger and you may not like the message, but here's the thing. This is what this person that's going to buy your business, this is how they're going to present, and this is who's going to finance the deal. And these are the boundaries that they're going to impose upon that buyer. So here's where your deal is going to happen. Well, I had a client say, well, they can put more money in. I said, I guess they could. If they were independently wealthy, I guess they could put more capital in. But the likelihood of you're finding that person who's willing to buy the business at a higher price than what his lenders and advisors are telling him the business is worth is, it's just not.
I explained to one of the guys, "So you know what that makes that person?" I said, "What? A very bad investor." And
Yeah.
anybody that has that kind of money probably did not get there by being a very bad investor. So,
Yeah.
unless if you wanna sell your business for way more than it's worth, start calling the people that won lotto. They might want it, right? But other than that, you're
Yeah.
not gonna get it, and, I think it's a disservice for, the business owner and the buyer to enter into these conversations without the full knowledge of what the steps are, what the process looks like, what a fair valuation for something in that industry, basically what the banks will lend on it. It's not fair to anybody that these advisors and or individuals are not doing their due diligence. One of the reasons we run the show is if I've done 250 episodes. If somebody wanted to learn this process, right, there are plenty of episodes where it says this is the step by step process you need to go through to properly value your business, to properly get it at its maximum value, and to get what you need for retirement. That sounds like a lot of work, and it is.
Yeah. When I was in wealth management, I was an early adopter of having a written investment policy statement around your wealth, which at a time when that, back in the 90s, when that was very, very uncommon, it was an institutional thing to have a investment policy statement. But what I would tell my clients is, and a lot of them were business owners, operators who created wealth in their businesses was, do you have a business plan? Do you have systems and processes wrapped around running your business day to day? Yeah. Well, why wouldn't you have that for the management of your wealth? And I would say the same thing to business owners that are going to sell their businesses. You built a business around systems and processes to get the outcomes that you're seeking, and yet you're coming into a process in a very uninformed way and trying to impose upon your advisor, expectations that are not informed. I'm sure all of your guests that are in my seat can, share stories with you, but I had a group I visited with recently and they had a business that was probably worth maybe 2 million. And I said, what do you think your business is worth? What's your expectation? They said 5 million. I said, how did you come up with the 5 million? How did you get there? And they said, well, there are 5 partners. We each want $1 million. Uh, what- your want does not translate, into value. I had another one. This is going back a few years, a residential services business. And I said, what do you think your business is worth? It's worth 3 million. I said, well, how did you come up with that number? And he said, well, one of my competitors sold recently for 1.5 million, and I have twice as many trucks as he does. That's okay. So I think that, and it's human nature. I think we anchor in things that, are sort of confirmation bias, right? We need $3 million or $5 million to make the math work. And so we look for things that are, can help us justify and confirm that. And again, I think fundamentally the industry of M&A advisors, business brokers doesn't do a good job of telling folks that's not where your business is. What I'll do in engagements like that, which is not uncommon when they have an expectation that can't be met in the marketplace, is to say, look, there's a whole industry of exit planners out there that if you need $5 million to achieve your goals, and your business is worth 2.5, then you need to sit down with someone and you need to develop a plan to get your business from 2.5 to 5. But wanting 5 or needing 5, it's not going to translate into a successful transaction.
So a lot of people don't get that a lot of these things they see on the open market were raised conditions in an extremely competitive space, and they automatically do your cognitive bias. They look at it and go, "Well, they got this, and I'm in the same space. I'm just smaller. I should get 30x or 5x or 7x." And I'm like, "No, it's your size. Businesses sell for 2x if they're running perfect, 3x, 4x." Right? You wake up a big boy, maybe 5x, 6x, or you wake up if you get big enough, you wake up a PE firm, maybe, all right? But the SBA is not going to fund that, right?
No, because in the private markets, that's private data. And,
Mhm.
and so you're not going to pick up the newspaper and see that the local dry cleaner sold at this multiple. What you are going to see is public market multiples. You're going
Right.
to see that this public company bought that other company and they paid X. And so I think the orientation that everybody's anchored in these public market multiples, which have absolutely no bearing on small business transactions.
And there's 2 tiers you have to go through
Unapologetic.
before you ever get to that level, right? You know,
Yeah.
you gotta you gotta be there's multiple, tiers. A lot of the guys in our space listening to the show, they're playing this game. They're playing a game of arbitrage. They're buying companies just under the PE radar, wanting to buy 2 or 3 of them that to put them together, run them for 3, 4, 5 years, sometimes shorter, and try to sell them to the PE firms because they've crossed that threshold that wakes what I always call wake up the giants, right? They wake
Yeah.
up the family offices and they wake up the PE firms when they start producing 4, 5, 6, $10 million in EBITDA, right? And that $2.5 million EBITDA company never would have got a spot on their radar. But
Right.
you bought 3 of them, you're at $7.5 million in EBITDA, and you're growing 20% year over year, and you've got an M&A team that can buy more. Now you're interesting to a PE firm, especially if you can leave that M&A team in place, right? You've got an acquisition team out on the hunt. It's a self-growing company and it fits their model. Now you can wake up the big boys. And these guys see those multiples. They see like the public market and they think it's them.
I do, but that's a great point in that there are a lot of ways to play the game as you describe it.
Mhm.
And I have been involved in transactions where private equity firms or family offices are buying a number of small businesses that, at a 3.5 multiple, knowing that once they aggregate and get to a certain EBITDA range, there's going to be the multiple is going to double.
Mhm.
There's going to be a multiple expansion because you've just swapped buyers. You're no longer dealing with the SBA. You're now dealing with private equity world. So even if they don't improve the businesses, which most of them have a plan for doing that,
Right.
they're going to get a multiple expansion through the aggregation process. So there's an alchemy trade in there, but it takes a lot of work to do it.
So what do you think the actual solution is? How do we get small business owners to one, choose better advisors, right? Like you said, most states don't have any criteria whatsoever to becoming a business broker. And the federal level, they used to have, I want to say 4 or 5 years ago, maybe longer, there used to be a federal requirement to call yourself a business advisor. That's
Yeah.
gone now. There's no federal, the SEC removed it. So
Yeah.
currently there's no federal guidelines that say if you call yourself a business advisor, you have to have some certifications or anything, right? So how do we get the word out to these small, medium businesses that, that's their retirement, that's their generational wealth, it's the money that's gonna pay for their kids and grandkids to go to college, and they're squandering it around because they have a lack of knowledge. What are some of the ways we can I mean,
Yeah, that's a great question. That's a big question. If the close rate in the industry is the 15 to 30%, range that I keep reading about, again, these are private transactions, so you're kind of on the honor system, and so I'm sure there's some noise in that data. But let's just say it's 30%. That means that 7 out of 10 businesses that dress up and go to market to get a transaction, and presumably the value in that business is the most significant asset that business owner has. If 7 out of 10 don't get a deal, imagine if you took that and applied it to the residential real estate market, and 7 out of 10 people that tried to sell their house couldn't get a deal or didn't get a deal. It'd be a national crisis. So I think it is a crisis. The data says that a significant percentage of businesses, almost 50%, are owned by people 50 years of age or older. They call that the silver tsunami. You've got enough in your beard, and I've got enough on top of my head to say we're part of that, right? Yeah. So there is this big wave coming ashore of business transitions. And if the market isn't functioning in a way where you can convert that to liquid resources to fund your retirement, then that's a huge issue. I don't know that regulating the industry is going to fix that. I got in the securities industry early, and anybody could be a broker or an advisor, and there was no educational requirement. We started seeing certifications. I became an early certified financial planner. But then all the wirehouses started manufacturing titles. So there was a certified this and a chartered that. And I think they lost their meaning. There are credentials, as you know, in the business broker M&A world. I don't know that any of them have any credibility with the seller of the business. They don't know the difference between an AMAA and a certified business intermediary. There are some good books out that to kind of walk through the process, but I don't think most people avail themselves of that. They're going to go buy a book and read about how to sell their business. So I don't have an answer, Ron. I would just say that from the seat I sit in, I've dealt with a lot of business people, 30 different businesses I've dealt with over the last 3 years, and the overwhelming majority of those are not going to transact for a variety of reasons. And these are people that want to sell their businesses, that want to retire. Some of them have health issues. And to me, it's a serious issue. And I wish I had a solution for it.
it's interesting is I don't think that most small business owners know who they should call, right? And they mirror this too much on the real estate industry. They know when it's time to sell their house, they call a real estate broker. So when it's time to sell their business, I must need to call a business broker. And if you haven't done a year or two's worth of exit planning, you're probably calling the wrong guy first, right? The
Yeah.
first guy you should be calling is an exit planner, a succession planner, somebody who understands the prep process to get it ready. Not all brokers, advisors are willing to take on that, 3, 4 year commitment to get you ready. Most of these guys, I don't know, and we'll figure out what your role is in a second, but most people say, look, you've done the work. Now I can take you and I can do everything and we can get this funded and we can get it sold. But they're not going to say, I'm not going to, if you're a 1, 2, 3, 4 man shop, how many clients can you take on if you're taking on that advisory role where, look, I'm going to work with you for 24, 36 months and
Yeah.
hope that you've listened to me and get this thing ready to sell. There's such a risk in that because we all know that, you know, you've been running a business for 30 to 40 years. It's a good chance you're set in your ways. Right? And to have
Yeah.
some advisor to tell you, no, 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 you got to do this all different if you want to sell. That's a high level of trust.
Yeah. And some of the things you do to prepare the business for sale are sort of contrary to what you would do to run it, for the next 20 or 30 years. But hey, I've run businesses and there were times where I didn't take advice very well, right? I think that may be the nature of being self-employed and running a business is sometimes you think you're smarter than than everybody else in running your particular business. I do like the fact that there seems to be an emerging and growing industry of exit planners, whatever their titles are and whatever their credentials are, that are really focused on preparing businesses for sale. In the 2 iterations I had before Optima, business brokerage firm, large M&A shop, that wasn't part of one of the firms, the national firm, actually added a exit planning component to it. But it was sort of ancillary and new. But for the most part, we just took people that came in the door, and it was very transactional. It was, we're not in the business of preparing you and getting you ready. If you're ready to go to market, we'll take you and market you and get a transaction. And I'm kind of a misfit here because I came out of wealth management, which is a very relational business. So I developed deep relationships with my clients. And this world is much more transactional. I think that's part of the issue as well. We'll take a lot of those folks that are transactional will take a business figure. Well, what have I got to lose? I'll take them out to market. I'll see what happens. If we get a transaction, great. If we don't, then I'll go on to the next one. Instead of saying, look, here are the problems and challenges you've got. You'd be better served to go talk to Ron or somebody over here that can help you figure out those things and prep your business to go to market. And then you're going to get a lot more value for your business, all things being equal, when you do go.
The interesting thing in this space also is there's a level of decision-making process that changes as the business gets larger. So in my limited view of things that I've had in the last few years, if the business has less than 3, say, founders, their cap table is small, right? It's usually an emotional decision. The person has to know, like, and trust the next guy taking over his business. He wants deep rapport. He wants somebody he knows he's going to carry on his legacy, take care of his employees. You start getting a cap table where there's outside investors and there's money that was raised, there's debt. It starts becoming more of a transactional situation where it's a money driven, situation. So as the company matures and they've got more investors and more senior executives who have equity positions and more voting, more votes need to be, to occur to have an exit. I think it becomes more logical and more numerical than it does at these smaller medium businesses. A lot of these small businesses stories I hear, they failed to close because the owner really wasn't clear what he's going to do next, and that uncertainty.
That emotional aspect of it is probably the most challenging aspect of being an advisor. I had the same issue in wealth management. At the end of the day, you can talk about the math and that's kind of the easy part. Although, again, if you have an unsophisticated seller, unsophisticated in the ways of selling your business, there are challenges with that. But at least you can have an objective conversation. But I had a conversation today with the seller. We have a letter of intent in front of us, and he is starting to react emotionally, what this means to him. And so the questions today were not about, the financial aspects of the deal, or if they were basically a subterfuge, not necessarily ill-intended, but for the emotional aspect of what am I going to do when I sell this thing? And what about my employees? I need to. One of the interesting phenomenons I see in sales like this, in the space I'm in, is a good owner operator is really worried about his employees and what's going to happen to them. Right? They're empathetic, caring people, and they care about the people that work for them. I've run into some that don't, but for the most part, they do. And they're worried that the buyer is going to come in and chase everybody out the door. The buyer is more scared than the seller that they're going to buy the business and the key people are going to leave. So both parties are worried about the same thing, maybe for different reasons, but are both worried about the same thing. And I've rarely found that to be a misalignment. And not to say there aren't firms that'll buy and cut, but in the space we're in Main Street and in lower middle market businesses, not so much. The buyers need to keep those key people.
It's detrimental when it happens. I've talked to At least 5 out of the 250. A few probably that wouldn't come on air because they were worried about saying stuff about, non-disclosure type of statements, so they would do the pre-interview and go, "You know what? I really can't talk about the." They figured out they can't have the conversation without saying stuff they think will get them in trouble. So
Yeah,
a lot of these guys who have exited, we do a pre-conversation to see how it will go, and then a lot of them realize that they can't separate what they should and shouldn't say well enough that they don't wanna be on, so I don't get them. But the ones I
yeah,
have covered, I've interviewed, or at least had I don't know if they've ever I'm trying to think if they actually made the episode, but I've had at least 5 that I can think of conversations where within the first 60 days, 90 days, some key people left. And it usually was the same thing I told you or we talked about earlier, mis misset expectations, conversations that should have been had, but were never
right.
had, right? In 2 of the cases, the owner should have asked the senior executives, "Is anybody interested in buying this when I retire?" Right?
Mhm.
They didn't. They sold it through a brokerage firm, sold it to a third party, and within one of them was a staffing company, had multiple locations there in Texas with you. I'll go that far. It's in the Houston and Austin area. They had locations in Houston and Austin. She buys a company that barely qualifies for SBA, so it's at the top end. She actually had to bring a couple $1,000,000 of her own money as a down payment because it was
Yeah.
she needed the full 5,000,000. It wasn't big enough. I think she was into it for like 7 plus, working capital and stuff. So I think she was into it like 7 and a half or so. First 60, 90 days, top 3 executives got really mad because they wanted to buy it and didn't know the owner was retiring. They leave because she didn't think to negotiate any type of stickiness to keep them around
Right.
anymore. And there was no existing non-competes or anything that would have held up in Texas, so they started pulling their top clients with them. Those 3 lead executives, had relationships with 65% of her clients. So and I'd say 40 to 50% of her business was gone in 90 days. Now she's got a debt she can't cover for the, SBA loans, and the
Yep.
SBA just basically said, "Sell it to them. You've got you don't have much choices. We're gonna have to call this due." The lenders basically said, "Find somebody to buy it, and preferably, you might wanna talk to them because they got your clients, and, we're gonna do a workout here." But, she's in these tough conversations now that she wouldn't have had those conversations been done at the proper time with the right people and brought them into the loop.
Yeah, I actually know that situation you're referring to. So I'm familiar with that, and that was a horrible outcome for everyone,
Mhm.
for the SBA, for the buyer, maybe not so much for the seller. I will say that there is a challenge. I completed a transaction for a professional services business. They were bought by a private equity firm out of Virginia in end of January of this year, and the buyer, the PE firm, said, before we close, we need to meet with these 3 key people you've identified on your management team. The seller went, absolutely not. Until the wire is gone out, I'm not putting you in front of my employees, because if you don't transact, then I'm in this very vulnerable spot. And it was almost a deal killer. We managed to get the deal done, and they came in immediately and offered these people a raise and a stay bonus, and a better title. And ultimately, it was going to be good for these folks because they were going to take more leadership in the business and be compensated for that. But I've run into that a few times where the buyer wants to meet the key people before the transaction, and the seller is adamant that they don't want to pull the curtain back and let them know. And there is a risk there.
Let's let's hone in a lot more on what you're doing now. Who is your target customer, and what kind of businesses do you love serving? What's your favorite, like, "Yeah, if I could do these all day, I'd rather have this industry and the customer."
That's a great question. I'm positioned in what I'll call the lower middle market, $5 to $50 million of annual revenue. I'll play below that and above that, but that's my sort of ideal client. And maybe to translate that into EBITDA, it's sort of a $2 to $10 million EBITDA. And again, generally speaking, that positions me a little above the SBA maximum lending limits, and below where Stevens and Houlihan Lokey and the other regional investment banks are. Um, I haven't really found industries that I particularly like and think I'm good at or particularly dislike. I haven't done any oil and gas deals, although I've had the opportunity to. And part of that is I'm from West Tennessee, and I'm in Dallas, Texas. And there are so many people that are so smart and knowledgeable about oil and gas transactions that I just don't feel like I can bring the value to the table that others can. And I'm willing to be honest about that. Is you'd probably be better served because there's some M&A shops, business brokers that have done 100 oil and gas transactions. I didn't think I'd be good at doing SaaS or, tech enabled services, but I've had a number of those come my way. I'm working one. I just signed up a new client yesterday that's a fintech group. At the end of the day, what I would say is that if I do my job well, which is running the system and process, you talked about developing that relationship with the client. I think that may be one of the things. If you ask me why the close rate's so low, it goes back to the fact I think very few people are willing to do the legwork you're willing to do in a transactional space, spending the time to really understand that client. It cuts against the math of I'm going to close 1 out of 3 deals, so I better load them up and get them into the market. But my belief is that, being successful for your clients, being a successful M&A advisor, not from the standpoint of making money at it, but from the standpoint of getting transactions that meet your client goals, which will then satisfy my goals, right? Is about having the systems and processes in place to gather the information, understand the business, be able to articulate the value proposition of that business through the teaser, the confidential memorandum, to give them a valuation that anchors them in a realistic price, and then get them in front of their ideal buyer. We do that by curating a buyer list. And again, because of the space we're playing in, we took a service business, residential service business to market. We curated a list of 10 upstream strategic buyers that are actively buying businesses in this client space, and said, we're going to call them first. We're not going to put you on biz buy sell or any of that. We're going to go to them and we're going to say, we've got an opportunity. It's not in market yet. We're going to show it to a handful of select buyers. If you're interested, let's have a conversation. We then, when we didn't get the buyer out of that group, went to Axial, axial.net,
Yep.
where, as you know, we were then sort of matched with private equity firms, family offices, independent sponsors that have expressed a specific interest in the industry that our client resides in. Onboarding them properly, understanding their business, developing work product that represents them professionally in the market, getting that in front of targeted ideal buyers, and then having the knowledge and experience to understand where the levers are you could pull in a negotiation. And I think that just comes with experience. I had bought and sold businesses personally, Ron, for years. But sitting in this intermediary seat and having to understand this is how deals get done. And these are the buttons that people are pushing, and you got price and you got terms, and the terms can be more important than the price in some cases. And where do we have, where can we negotiate? Working capital has become one of the biggest issues that I face. The seller believes that, that's their money. It came through the business. It's cash on my balance sheet. Why should I leave that for a buyer? I've had more deals get crossways over the working capital. And now I address that in the LOI. It may not be an absolute number, but I address that in the LOI now to say, this is how we're going to deal with working capital. This is how we're going to define it. So, I like working with people that, one, they want to sell their business. So they have a motivation and desire to sell their business. They're not just testing the waters to see what's out there. I charge enough of a front end fee to be able to compensate myself so that in the event that they're not really sellers, that I will be compensated at least and recover my time in the deal. But here's the thing, I'm a serial entrepreneur like you, and I really enjoy working on businesses that I haven't worked on before, because I love to tear a business apart and figure out, how does this work? How do they charge for their fee or their services or their product? And, what is unique and special about this business? Because getting to their value proposition and figuring out how to position them with their ideal buyer with the right story, I think is a critical part of taking care of my clients.
You're a serial entrepreneur, and so am I. So there's a reason why I'm not a broker. I have a friend of mine who, when we first got into this space, he goes, "You know what? I'll just go buy a brokerage and we'll have lots of leads." I was like, number one, that's not how that works, right? Number two, sounds like a lot more work than what I want to do as far as the brokerage side of it. But he had a point to some extent. Is I told you before we started the recording, my wife and my son started a dessert business. I don't work in the tent. You know why? 'Cause I like dessert and I'm already overweight, right? So I do my best to do marketing and advertising, stuff like that. I don't think I could be a business broker without going, "Wait a second, this one's really nice. Why don't I just buy this one?" How do you avoid
Yeah.
mentally wanting to do that for some of these business? I know that, I interviewed Carl Allen. That's how he became who he is right now. He started off as a
Yeah.
business broker, and then one of his transactions fell through, and he literally said, "You know what? I'll buy it." Then he had to call his wife and say, this is a story he told on the show. Had to call her wife, it's like, "Hey," she's like, "That deal go through?" He goes, "Well, kinda." She goes, "What do you mean kinda?" She goes, "Well, I bought it." And she's like,
Yeah.
"Well, you're retired. You're only doing this because you wanna help people. What are you doing buying a bus company," or whatever it was, right? So how do you avoid looking at some of these going, "You know what? That'd be fun to run. I'm gonna buy that one."
Well, I actually think that's a good thing, right? I think that one of the ways I bring value is I've been a buyer of businesses before I sat in the seat.
Mhm.
So I'm able to look at it from the perspective of a buyer and say, this is how I view this business. And I like to get excited about the business. I like to think about what would it be like to run this business and how would I grow it? Because I think that allows me to have a better interaction with the prospective buyers. To your point, though, I have run across multiple businesses in my short career in this intermediary seat where I've said, man, if I were 45 instead of 65, I'd love to buy that business and step in there and operate. I have enough common sense at 65 where I sort of understand what it means to operate a business. With that said, there is a group here in Dallas that started off as a sell-side advisory firm, is still a sell-side advisory firm, but started buying businesses that for whatever reason weren't snapped up in the market. And so now they've morphed into a private equity firm with a sell-side advisory practice. I've actually had some family offices here in town come to me and say, well, look, if you see businesses that you really like, that don't sell, why don't we put together a fund and we can just buy those? And I go, well, that's great, but who's going to operate?
Yeah.
Because
Just say you
I'm not
need
going
to
to
cultivate
operate.
operators if you're gonna do that because that's the key, right?
But I think that's an interesting point is that in this seat, as you know, you do see businesses that you go, the market's just not, for whatever reason, this is not an attractive business to buyers. The buyer's not going to get the price or terms they want, but it's a really interesting business. And I find that fun, but I will say as a serial entrepreneur, to your point, I'm tempted when I see it to go to that place where I'm like, man, I could run that business. I'd do this and I'd do that.
I won't say who it
But
is, and and he hasn't been on the show, so I don't feel like I'm stealing his idea. I just know him and know what he's up to. Um, there are a couple of guys out there who farm. They have 2 businesses. They have that small business brokerage, and they're looking for the buyers, and they have a holding co that they're cultivating operators. They were in your position doing mid-market stuff, and they had somebody like you just did, this family office or this holding company said, "We'll give you the money, just you gotta show us the good ones." What he did is he's using these guys who are great operators, they have great skill set. Maybe they only have 3 or $400,000, so they can stay in that small business world, but they're actually stepping down. If you look at what they've run operationally, they've run a 10,000,000 business, a $100,000,000 business, and now they get
right.
out of it wanting to buy a company, and all they have is 300K down, and the SBA loan's gonna limit them to 5,000,000, so they step in that thinking they're gonna grow it, and there's 2 problems with that. It takes a different human being to run a company from 10,000,000 to 100,000,000 than it did to take it from, you know 5,000,000 to 10,000,000. There's a different skill
Yeah.
set. There's that systemizing. A lot of times those guys that step into that 10,000,000 to 100,000,000 systems and processes were in place. They just had to sell and grow. right? To where if you get that, they're stepping into things where the systems and processes may not be perfected. They may not be able to withstand the stress test of going from that range. So what they're doing is they're finding those operators that they're misfit. They have a decent sized brokerage down there. They're finding the operators that they have 300K down. They have the operations. They should be running a $10 million company, but all they can do is buy a five. And they're saying, you know what? I'll partner with you. We'll fund this transaction. Come look at this thing over here. You got to put some skin in the game. You're going to buy your equity position. We're going to take your $300,000 down. And over the next 2 to 3 years, we'll increase your equity position, but you're going to work with our holdco and grow it this way. And it's working.
Very similar to the searcher model. And boy, here in Dallas, it seems like there's a searcher on every corner. And there are a couple of organizations that will back these, mid-career executives and businesses to come out and be a searcher to find a business that's in their sweet spot. They will provide the capital. The searcher will put a little capital in, but they'll pay them $200,000 a year for 2 years to go out and search. And they give them that 2-year window to find a deal. And that's becoming a bigger and bigger thing. There's more money chasing that and looking for operators that can step into those roles. What data they have that they're publishing says that their returns are actually higher. But I think that twist is new enough where I'm not sure there's enough data out there to really know at this point. But operators are finding a good operators is a great thing. If you can match up a good operator with a good business, that's magic.
And that's something that's an acquired skill in itself, right? A lot of people think, well, I'm going to buy this company, I'm going to hire a CEO and they're going to run it. I was like, cool. How many CEOs you've hired? Well,
Right.
no. I was like, do you understand what it takes to hire a CEO? Are you looking for, is this company need a visionary CEO, somebody who innovates and creates new products all the time? Or does it need, the operational guy who's just going to keep this gear turning and slowly increase it because it's already got a proven market growth and strategy, and the visionary is going to distract it. There are just different mindsets that are, a company in different stages of life cycles these companies are in. If you haven't hired 5 or 6 CEOs, who are you to say you're going to buy a company for $5 million, not operate it, slap a CEO in there, and it's going to run great?
Yeah, you're spot on. There's a lot of risk in that, and there are companies at different stages of evolution that need certain skill sets that are not universal to all CEOs or senior people. So that's a great observation. But I enjoy seeing businesses. I still enjoy tearing them apart, figuring out what makes them work. I like developing relationships with people, and I like being the trusted advisor to, give them counsel. It doesn't always work, and it's challenging in this seat where you have this adversarial relationship with the other party that wants to pay you as little as possible to take your business. You want to get as much as possible. The seller isn't necessarily well informed and knowledgeable about the process and the value of their business. They see particularly when it's a private equity firm on the other side, they think they're Darth Vader, that these are evil, greedy people that are, its mission in life is to destroy them and underpay them and fire all their employees. And it's a really, I'd like to grow my business. My plan is to go into other markets. And I've got a few investors that back me. And I was saying, I don't know how to go hire a deal maker. I don't know what qualities I'm looking for in a deal maker, because in just my 3 years of working with a large M&A shop and a small business broker, I saw people that were completely transactional, and they were very antagonistic to the sellers that they represented and antagonistic to the buyers, but they made it work. They closed deals. I saw people that were warm and fuzzy and held everybody's hand and didn't get deals done, and some that did. And I really don't know what the ideal skill set is. You have to have enough understanding of transactions to be able to, represent your client effectively. It'd be like being a lawyer, but not understanding the law. You have to have a base knowledge. But you also have to have a remarkable amount of patience and willingness to hold people's hands and communicate and tell them when you think they're making a bad a bad judgment or bad decision, but not do it in an offensive way. I don't know. It's a really interesting seat to sit in, and I'm continually guessing whether I'm doing it right, or how do I get better at the service of being the trusted advisor to a seller.
And we're not even in the worst market. There's actually news articles, I guess it's been 6 months to a year now ago, that in Japan, businesses are, leaders and business leaders are giving their business away, not even transacting it because they want the legacy and their loyalty to their customers and loyalty to their employees is so strong. They're begging people to take over. So they're actually
Wow.
quite literally not family generation, second generational stuff. They're going to some of these PE firms and said, "We'll give this thing to you as long as you contract that says you take care of my employees, you take care of my customers, you do this." And there's actually news articles on it that it's so bad. There's not enough buyers there that companies are quite often, more often than you would ever imagine being given to a trusted set of hands. So hopefully we don't get to that.
That's fascinating.
We
I hadn't heard that. Obviously, there's a cultural dynamic there
Yeah,
of that loyalty, yeah, that I don't know that it's unique to Japan, but certainly is part a well established part of their culture. Um, uh, that tells you though how dysfunctional markets are, and maybe there are other explanations for that. Maybe we have fewer people that are interested in buying businesses. I've had a number of business owners and operators that have told me I can't find people interested in being partners in the business. I've tried to elevate some people up and they don't want the responsibility. They're willing to forego any reward for that by being a 9 to 5, by being able to clock in and clock out. And they don't even want to come into the office. They want to work from home. And so maybe there is a generational shift here.
yeah, there is.
I met with a prospective client the other day, who's been running his business for about 30 years. It's a manufacturing business. And he said, I said, "Why are you interested in selling?" He said, "I get along with machines really well, but people not so much." He said, "It's never been a problem. I've had these longstanding employees, but he said most of them have now retired and they're being replaced with, I don't know what the gen we're on now is, millennials, Gen X, Gen Z, but he said, I've got these young employees." And he said, the culture I built doesn't really matter that much. They will go to the place down the street for 25 cents an hour. And not that there's anything wrong with that, but he just said, I don't know how to manage people. The people that are willing to take the job now, I don't know how to manage them and motivate them. So he said, I'd like to work with the machines and I'd like to have a strategic partner come in and buy a controlling interest and manage the people. I said, well, that's a possibility.
Awesome, awesome. How do people reach out to you, Lane? What's the best way that people can, say, "Hey, I got a business for sale," or "Hey, I'd like to learn more about what you do." What's the method you want them to contact you with?
Sure. So I have an easy phone number for Optima, 214-214-3010. And like most people, I have a cell phone tied to my hip, except when I'm having dinner with my wife. And I'm Lane, Lane, at the optimateam.com. Very appreciative of the opportunity to come on the show and visit with you again, Ron. We'll have to do this every 2 or 3 years.
Yeah. I love catching up with you. You always seem to be, it seems like you're working on cool things, and it's the world needs to hear what we have to say. Those
Yeah.
companies need to take certain steps and precautions and actions to make themselves at their highest value. So thank you for spending your time here. Hang out for a few seconds afterwards, and we'll call that a show. I want to announce our new channel partners, the ITX Marketplace. Since 1998, ITX has created $5 billion in value by selling more than 225 IT businesses in 20 countries. ITX works exclusively with IT-enabled businesses generating between $5 million and $30 million who are ready to be sold, and M&A decision makers who are ready to buy. For over 25 years, ITX has developed industry knowledge that helps determine whether a seller is a good fit for their buyers before making the match. ITX Mergers and Acquisition Marketplace we have partnered with has a proprietary database of 50,000 plus global buyers seeking IT service firms, managed service providers, Microsoft service providers, software as a service platforms, and channel partners with Microsoft, Oracle, ServiceNow, and the Salesforce space. If you have an IT-enabled business you're ready to sell, I want you to visit the IT exchangenet.com/marketplace. How to exit. That link will be in the show notes. Visit them now.